The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back when the Jints, Dem Bums, and the Yankees played in New York. Half of the team is missing, or at least one-third of the team is missing. Noel Hynd hasn't joined us, but Alan Blumkin has. And because this is the week of the Hall of Fame decisions, I thought we'd be a little nostalgic and go back and examine the Hall of Famers from the teams we grew up watching in the early 50s. Alan, I'm going to start with you, of course, because Noel isn't here. But I'd like to start with what we talked about off air a little bit, how 1953, the Yankees had how many guys who were Hall of Famers? 5 guys.
5.
And
by the way, the Giants had another one who I just remember that, Hoyt Wilhelm. Yeah, he's very easily forgettable from that period.
Yes, Hoyt Wilhelm, who hit a home run.
His first time up
game,
and never hit one after that, yeah.
Right, and that was 53, too.
52, he came up. He was already 30 when he came up, yeah.
Did he come up in 52 or 53?
Yeah, 52.
Oh, okay. You would know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was a World Series hero, too. With the Giants. But 5 on one team, the 53 Yankees are arguably the best Yankee team ever. You got the 27 Yankees, you got the 61 Yankees.
You got the 1998 Yankees.
Right. A lot of them to choose from. But you can make a case for 53.
Yes.
And when we talked off the air, we talked about some of the reasons they are both of our favorite Yankee teams. One of the reasons for me was that their incredible depth. When Coleman was called away back into the service, Billy Martin filled in at second base and had a terrific year. Billy Martin was great.
He's basically a 260 hitter during the season, but during the World Series he would turn it up 100 notches. And 53, he batted 500. He got 12 hits. Some of them were extra bases, and he drove a winning run in Game 6 of that World Series, which gave them the series over the 105.
Was that the year that everybody lost a pop fly in the air and he comes diving?
No, that was 52.
That was okay.
Yeah.
All right. And we've talked about this before, but I think Billy Martin was represented by the same person. They didn't call him an agent back then or whatever, but as Jackie Robinson was. And they had a rivalry, and Billy Martin outplayed Jackie Robinson in the World Series.
In all 4 of the World Series that they played against each other.
Yeah, he outplayed him virtually all the time.
Yeah.
So hats off to Billy. He died much too soon. Let's put it that way.
Another one who was like that in antiquity was Johnny Evers of Tinker Stevens to Chance fame. He was another one who didn't hit much during the regular season, but any time he got into the World Series, he turned it up quite a few notches.
Yeah. Alan, we were talking about Hall of Famers that simply don't deserve to be Hall of Famers, and we were going to talk later about Frankie Frisch and what have you, but I want to ask you, of those guys, and I always thought it was Tinkers to Evers growing up, but it's Evers.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Whatever. Do you think those guys should be in the Hall of Fame, or deserve to be in, or did the legend of that little thing?
I think Chance is a no-brainer. Frank Chance is a no-brainer. Evers and Tinker, you can make cases for them because they played the dead ball era. Now, in the National League especially, Honus Wagner was so far beyond the rest of the National League players during that the first decade and a half that anybody who gets it as a position player besides him pales in comparison.
You and David Nemec have talked about this subject many times.
Oh yeah.
How do you suppose that Honus Wagner and Ty Cobb, the likes of those guys, would do in today's game?
Well, Ty Cobb, somebody said that in the 50s, if Ty Cobb was playing then, he only had about 320, and somebody asked him why. He says because he's 70.
Okay.
So that's very, very hard to answer because the conditions are so different from what it was back then. Back then, you had no night ball. You had no travel flying, and you had no blacks.
Right.
The blacks played in their own league until Robinson finally came in 1947. But a lot of people say that they should count any major league record that was set before 1947 because blacks weren't allowed.
Right.
That's to me is pushing it a little too far. But and a dead ball, the National League was much worse than the American League as far as offensive production during the dead ball era. So it's very, very hard to say. But Frisch, when he was on the Old Timers Committee, putting a number of these Giants and Cardinals from the 20s and early 30s that had absolutely no business being in there.
Okay. Hey, one guy who's in there on the 53 team that people really don't know as much about, and he was a terrific power hitter with first the New York Giants and then the Yankees, Johnny Mize.
Well, he came
I think he came up with St. Louis.
Exactly,
But he played in New York all those years. And me as an avid baseball fan, know very little about Johnny Mize. So this is just off the top of my head. I can get some knowledge from Alan Blumkin. Tell me about Johnny Mize. He
came up with the Cardinals in 1936, and he was their regular first baseman through 41. When he was sent to the Giants because Branch Rickey thought he was losing a step. And Branch Rickey always said that he'd rather get rid of a player too soon than too late. So Mize, because he was traded to the Giants, missed those Cardinal teams of the 40s. And the Polo Grounds suited him very well. He was a left-handed hitter with tremendous power and tremendous eye. He very rarely ever struck out. In fact,
who did the Giants give up to get him?
I don't remember, but they weren't too guys that were not all that great.
So it was a terrific trade for the Giants.
Yeah, and in 1947, Johnny Mize hit 51 home runs and struck out fewer than 50 times. He's the only player ever to something like that. Still. And
Hal Bach's favorite player of all time. He tells the story of when he was traded, Johnny Mize. He cried. You cried at times when you had players. I cried when Sal Maglie was gone.
Oh, I was 10 years old and eating supper when it came over this is in March 1954, it came over the radio that the Yankees had sold Vic Raschi to the Cardinals. And I was crying the whole night. I couldn't understand why they would do that. It turned out that Yankees were right. Raschi was basically done by then. But they broke that team up because after the fifth championship, a number of them were holding out. And George Weiss decided to make an example of Raschi, who at that point was 35. And he has had knee problems for a couple of years. He was 13-6 in 1953. And they decided that basically that, Weiss decided that it was, time for some of them to go. So he sold Raschi to the Cardinals. And I remember I was up crying like a baby all night with that.
At 10.
At the age of 10, yeah.
Well, at the age of 10, for me, a few years later, the Giants moved. My New York Giants became the San Francisco Giants, and I can remember shedding real tears. And I also remember rooting as hard as I could for the Milwaukee Braves in the World Series in '57. I knew that Giants were gone. I couldn't bring myself at that time to root for the Yankees in any way, shape, or form. I respected the piss out of them, but
most of the people who were Giants and Dodger fans couldn't bring themselves to root for the Yankees.
Yeah. I probably would have been better served as a fan looking back over the years. As much as I love the Mets, they have given me a lot of service. It has not been easy. For those of you, those are the three listeners out there who don't know what the word service means. Service means heartache, troubles, not good stuff.
Italian, yeah.
Yeah, that's Italian. What is it in Italian?
Agita.
Say again? Ah, okay. I learned something there. Yeah, I would have been better served to be continuing my my fanaticism for the Braves over the years. In '58, I rooted for them because I rooted for them hard, and more because of getting used to it in the '57 World Series, but more because I couldn't get used to the SF on the Giants cap. It just made me sick. I thought the NY on the Giant cap was as classy a logo, classier than the Yankees. It was just in Old English, and it was just everything I love to look at in a cap logo and love to look at then. And you take away a kid's team at age 10, and it brings us to the future. You got teams who are still up in the air about where they're going to be 4 years from now, 5 years from now. I'm thinking of Tampa Bay. I'm thinking of
Marlins.
The Marlins.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the A's here in Oakland. It isn't really shovels not in the ground for a new ballpark. They could be in Las Vegas in a New York minute, and that's the way it goes, and it is wrong. Cities should retain eminent domain of their sports franchises. They've given so many breaks, and the antitrust thing in baseball is almost requires that they don't. I mean, if you look at things rationally, it should almost require that kids shouldn't have a team swept up from them in the middle of the night, and it still sticks with me. It's been 60 some odd years since they moved, and I'm still pissed. And that 10-year-old boy in me is still pissed.
George W. Bush administration gave the antitrust exemption, as far as that concerned, to the other three: football, basketball, and hockey. And football basically did the same thing. The Colts moved in 1984. They moved in the middle of the night to Indianapolis. The original Browns are now have been in Baltimore, which Art Modell took them there after they were, financially extremely successful with Cleveland, because they wouldn't build them a new park. And the worst one, beside the Raiders went to L.A. and they went back
twice.
to Oakland, and the Rams have gone from Cleveland to Los Angeles to St. Louis, back to L.A. But the San Diego, what used to be the San Diego Chargers, they were playing in the old Murph, the old baseball park there, and they paid $600,000, I think it was, as a relocation fee to go in with the Rams to this new palace that's supposed to open up this fall. And they played the last couple of years in a dump that seats about 27,000. And to me, there'll always be second fiddle to the Rams there. And not too many people who held season tickets in San Diego are going to go up to Los Angeles for their games.
No question about
that. They feel betrayed, yeah. Some of it's stupid, but it's not limited to baseball. Look, anytime I looked at a Dodger player like Hodges or Snyder or Erskine, the first year or two, Ferrillo and Reese with that L.A., as much as I couldn't stand the Dodgers, I didn't want them to leave.
No, you wanted you wanted National League Baseball. You wanted the Subway Series type thing. You wanted the competition. And we've talked about this before. When the Giants and Dodgers left, attendance didn't go up appreciably in Yankee Stadium in 1958.
No, in 1961, which was the last year before the Mets came in, the Yankees, even with the Tulsa to themselves and with Mantle and Maris having that tremendous home run race, drew about 1,750,000.
Hey, there were 20,000 people there to see Roger Maris hit his 61st home run.
Yeah, that's because of Fort Frick. With the asterisk.
Right. And let's clarify again, that asterisk never appeared in a Major League record book.
No.
So it was...
So they have a 154-game season, 162-game season. But the next year, Maury Wills went on to break Ty Cobb's single-season record for stolen bases, and there's nothing. No asterisk, no nothing.
Right.
And people...
nothing even said. I don't even think about that now. I just realized that. It was... or you just made me realize that.
Fort Frick was a ghostwriter for Babe Ruth. So he had a personal interest in, keeping Maris from that record.
Right.
But, now nobody puts the asterisk in front of that accomplishment. They put asterisk in front of Barry Bonds with the 73 and Mark McGwire with the 70. But, that's a whole different...
Is there an asterisk in the official record book with Bonds?
No.
Oh, okay. There isn't. Okay.
No.
I didn't think. You'd have to put, if you want to go to the asterisk system, you could put it on virtually any record.
Exactly. Yeah.
For a myriad of reasons. So. But the record book has been bastardized in a lot of ways. The game has been bastardized in a lot of ways.
You want me to get back on Johnny Mize for a little bit?
Yeah, if you would.
Okay, the Yankees acquired him in August 1949 on waivers. He was part of the Leo DeRocher program to back up the truck, because when DeRocher went to the Giants, they had all these home run hitters that had no speed at all.
Right.
So they got rid of almost everybody. And they sold Mize to the Yankees. Mize was 36 years old, and his knees started to go. So he had a siege of 1950 with the Yankees. We had to go to the minors, but he had 25 home runs and drove in 70 runs in something like 75 games. And he basically became a platoon player with first baseman who only the Yankee fans, Joe Collins, the only Yankee fans from those years remember. And
that was I play a lot of stat baseball type thing, where computer games and what have you. And on the 53 Giants, they're platoon, but they're both left-handed hitters. So I wonder.
I mean the Yankees, yeah.
Yeah, on the Yankees rather. I wonder how Casey managed that platoon. Was it just a hunch thing?
Yeah, well, Mize was not exactly a gazelle on the bases of the field, or in the field by then.
Right.
So Collins played an awful lot of the games. He would go in, go in for the last couple of innings as a defensive replacement. He was decent offensively, but nowhere near the caliber of Mize.
You have a great story about your neighborhood arguments, and we've all had those. We stand on the corner, and this guy's better than that.
Oh yeah.
And as a 10-year-old, what do you know? You just know names. You tell your story, and I'll tell mine.
Okay, I used to argue that where I was living in Queens. No kid my age was born in Queens. Everybody was from the Bronx or Brooklyn. So you had Yankees, basically Yankees fans and Dodger fans. So every time the World Series come on, we do a position comparison, and I would argue that Joe Collins was better than Gil Hodges, even though I know it was total nonsense. But,
all right, now I'll tell you one. Same year, not the same year. This is 55, but the same age for me, because I'm a few years younger than you. So me as a 10-year-old, 1955, Neil Silva, my friend, my acquaintance from Northridge, the co-op I lived in, he lived across the street, and he had older brothers. So his older brothers would educate him on. He knew more than most 10-year-olds, and certainly more than I did, because on some things, I'm a Giant fan, he's a Dodger fan. And I remember saying to him something about Jackie Robinson is washed up. And he looks at me and he says, Jackie Robinson is better today than you'll ever be as long as you live. Washed up. And that was just a great comeback to an argument, of course. But like Jackie Robinson's washed up, I'm 10 years old, and this, that, and the other thing. So it's the last day. It's the morning of the 7th game of the World Series between the Dodgers and the Yankees. And technically, the Giants are still world champions. Am I correct?
Yeah, 1955 we're talking about.
Right, we're talking about 55. So before the game, I said, Neil, make in my kid's way, whatever I said, right now, who's the world champion? Knowing that one of the Yankees, the Dodgers, within hours would be world champion. But I remember taking pride and sticking to the fact that my New York Giants were still world champions. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. That's the kind of feeling that if 2 years later you rip a team out of that 10-year-old's hands and just for bucks, and it really was just for bucks. No team moves for any other reason. That's a real tragedy. That's bad. And
well,
sports,
the Braves left Milwaukee after 13 years,
yeah.
and the last ownership that bought them in Milwaukee bought them with the specific purpose of moving them out.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because
the guy who bought them, Miller, didn't he die in a plane crash?
Yeah. But he was the last ownership was the one who moved them to Atlanta, and what happened basically was that when Minnesota came into the league in 1961 in the American League, all of a sudden the TV rights for the Braves were cut in half.
Oh,
because the Braves were in Minnesota and Iowa and all those states, and so they decided that fans weren't going to support them anymore. The team went backwards a little bit, and they moved to Atlanta. But because Milwaukee held the Braves in 1965 to the last year of the lease, the Braves that year drew around $500,000. In the last year, when it came to the expansion in 1969, Milwaukee was left in the cold. And the only reason they got a team back was because the Pilots went bankrupt after that one season, and Milwaukee was the only place that had a stadium readily available. That's how they got the Brewers.
Yeah, and the players didn't even know about it, the final decision, until they were leaving spring training. They had to sew M's on the caps and what have you.
Yeah,
it was just
the 1953 Bowman set has Joe Adcock with a Boston Braves cap. He never played a minute for the Boston Braves. He's with Cincinnati, and then they traded him to the Braves over the winter. So he never played one inning.
They didn't airbrush it out. I think Topps was the first, and every time Topps airbrushed a card, it looked like shit.
I know that, yeah.
Every time. They could never replace it with a replica that no kid couldn't see. That's not right. Just look at it. That's not right. Sometimes they'd get the cap right, and like I can remember Casey Wise with the Braves.
Oh, God, yeah.
He had a Cub uniform on that they airbrushed. I mean, just lousy jobs of doing that.
Yeah, one of the worst I've ever seen was the 1957 Bobby Shantz. He was traded late during the winter from the A's to the Yankees, and the card is an A's uniform, and the NY is superimposed where the A used to be.
Yes,
it's an A's uniform. Yankees have had uniforms like that. Yeah.
Right, or you'd see the collars were different on uniforms. I wonder who they were trying. I mean, bless his heart, the man who was doing all this, Cy Berger, hired me years later to be the West Coast representative for that Topps baseball card company, and I got to live a fantasy life between 1983 and 1995. I would travel from my home in the Bay Area to I'd do the California League and the Northwestern League, which was like a rookie league where players would come in out of college and out of high school, and I'd sign them to their Topps contract. I'd go around from team to team in the summer, and Topps would pay me good money. They'd pay my per diem, and I would obligate players to contracts. So when they reached the big leagues, we'd have their permission to use their picture, and we'd pay them big bucks to do so.
That's because of Maury Wills.
Exactly. And, I'm looking at it right now. I'm going to take a picture of it and send it to you. I have the letter that Topps sent me as an introduction letter to everybody, to who may concern. Ralph Tyko is our representative. Please help him, this, that, and the other thing. And I have it on my wall, and I cut out a picture of the aforementioned Maury Wills and put it on there because he is the reason. And let me tell this story of how it came to be that I even applied for the job. There was a book out in the 70s that the late Margaret Nearing, my beloved mother-in-law at the time, gave me, and it was the flipping card book of.
Oh yeah, I have that. Yeah.
You have that.
Oh yeah.
And if you look in that book, Cy Berger writes a story of how it came to be that the history of Topps and how they changed their idea about signing all the minor league players. They'd have it scouts out, and they'd sign the players that the scouts thought would make the majors, and they neglected to sign Maury Wills. They snubbed him when he was in the minors because they didn't think he'd make it. And all of a sudden, Maury Wills gets some Bobby Bragan training and learns to switch hit, makes the majors, becomes this big star, and Maury Wills holds out on him. And there's no early Topps cards with Maury Wills. So
his first Topps card was in 1967 as a Pirate.
Right. So I realized that they're using players. It doesn't take much of a baseball scout to sign everybody. And I'd go and sign everybody who was in the minors to contracts, to Topps contracts. We paid them $5 at that time, and when and if they made the majors, they'd get the big bucks. Well, I read he wrote the preface to that book and explained the Maury Wills story, and years later it stuck in my mind, why don't you try to become the Topps rep? So I wrote him a letter telling him of my qualifications, that I was an insurance, I owned an insurance agency and obviously have good communication skills and this, that, and the other thing. And sure enough, 2 years later, he writes me back and he says, if you're still interested, we'd love to have you do. At that time, it was just, the first year was just the California League. And I went to these 7 or 8 different teams, and it was an unbelievable gig after it became the Northwest League. There were times I did the Midwest League, so I'd get to go to all these different cities in the Midwest that I would never have visited under any circumstances. All these minor league cities, and an appreciation for minor league baseball that has carried over to this day. And I'm blessed. But you're right, it was Maury Wills that changed the way Topps did it. So he may have had a bad design thing going where he couldn't superimpose very well in those days, but he certainly had a great idea in terms of marketing, and Topps has been, they're a not multi-million dollar corporation, but they still make plenty of bucks. They've adapted to doing it on the internet. They can make cards for all kinds of occasions and what have you. But I have great memories of that, and I just want to say I signed well over 200 players who later went on to make the bigs.
They don't. Topps doesn't do football or basketball anymore.
I know,
yeah.
and I remember as a kid, their basketball and their football cards were very precious to me. I learned a lot about football, learned everything I knew about football, baseball, and basketball from baseball cards.
My parents had no interest in any of this. And the cards was when I started buying the cards when I was 8 years old.
You were an only child. You were an only child.
No, I have a brother that's.
That's right. But they were young. They were young.
He got into it because of Mickey Mantle.
Right.
And so anyway, I started buying the cards when I was 8 years old. In fact, we moved to Queens in June '51. My grandparents came from the Bronx. My mother's parents. My grandfather gave me half a buck. The first thing I did was go to the candy store and buy baseball cards. I thought my mother was going to kill me, and that's how I learned about the game. And I started buying them for real in 1952. Then I started to have an idea what that's the Topps big cards and the small Bowmans. I became very, very interested over the years in the Topps Bowman wars of the 50s, why certain players were in one and not the other. I spent, as I mentioned before, I spent tons of quarters looking for Topps mantles in 54 and 55 that never existed. And
hey, it taught me math, and it taught you something.
Oh, yeah, it taught me.
No, go ahead.
Figure out batting averages, slugging average, ERAs, because I wasn't interested in math beyond the basics. I didn't do well in math in high school at all. Algebra and trigonometry and geometry, I had no interest in any of that.
Instinctively, you knew that you weren't going to be using that stuff, but it was nice to know long divisions, and it was nice to know how to slugging percent. All that stuff was learned from baseball cards.
Exactly.
But let me brag on your memory for a little while. In I think it's the 53 set, you know every player by the number on the back of the cards. All the cards.
The 52 top set.
52 top set.
Yeah, the other ones I know some, but I haven't trained myself to remember. 52 top set. I can do 1 through 407. Yeah.
Okay, like if I picked a number out of my hat, let's say, for lack of a better word that I could use, that would be appropriate. I could use any word, but it would be nicer to use. Picked it out of my hat. I'll pick a number 341 and ask you who is that.
Hal Jeffcoat.
Now, not only do you know that Hal Jeffcoat was the person, you could give me a paragraph about Hal Jeffcoat. Tell me about Hal Jeffcoat.
Hal Jeffcoat came up as an outfielder. He was a Cub at that point. He came up as an outfielder and couldn't hit. Also, they converted him to a pitcher later in his career, and he did fairly decently as a pitcher. He also had a brother named George Jeffcoat, who was about 20 years older than him, that played the major leagues.
Okay, I'm going to. We can't do this all day because
I know,
I just want to prove a point that to myself, that as well as the audience, that I've got an absolute maven here and have had for 3 years, Alan. If anybody wants to go to to YouTube, type in "comfortably zoned Alan Blumkin," and the hundreds of hours of contributions that you have given us comfortably zoned will come up. 241 on that set.
341.
No, but I'm going to give you another one. 241.
Okay. 241 was Tommy Byrne as a Brown. What happened with him is he had a very good years with the Yankees in 49 and 50, but he walked everybody. You know, he was a wild man. He would walk the bases loaded and get the people out. And finally, in 1951, Topping and Webb had enough of him and told Weiss to get rid of him. So Weiss sent him to the Browns, and he bounced to the White Sox, and he wound up in the 1954 in the Pacific Coast League, and he learned control there. And so they brought him back for the end of 1954. He had a big year in 1955, and he retired after 1957. He started the last game of the 55 World Series with Johnny Padres beating him 2-0. And Byrne was also a very, very good hitter for a pitcher. He was used quite often as a pinch hitter, and he had, he was a very good hitter.
Okay, now you know how everything goes around, comes around thing to callbacks. Let's just say, for lack of a better expression, we were talking about that 1955 game that I was pregame with Neil Silva when I said, "Who's the world champion?" The losing pitcher in that game for the Yankees in 1957 was Tommy Byrne. Am I right?
He lost the game where Matthews hit the home run in the fourth game. Lawson started Game 7 in 1957.
Oh, well, who lost Game 7 of the 55 World Series?
That was Byrne.
For the Yankees?
I just mentioned
that was Byrne.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I was right, but I didn't know about the Lawson game.
Yeah.
Well, I thought Magley was in Lawson's
perfect game.
no-hitter. Magley was in that one, right?
Yeah.
So, your memory wears off on me, too. I could keep up with you on certain days.
I'll give you one more before we close. 141 was, I'm sure as a Giant fan you remember this one, Clint Hartung.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
yes. The Great White Hope. The Great White Hope.
Well, he came out of the Army. He was supposed to be a combination of Babe Ruth and Walter Johnson.
Right.
And he pitched for a while, but he's basically remembered for going in to run for Don Mueller after Mueller broke his leg strolling into third base in the Bobby Thompson game.
Right, and you know what that gave way to? His broken leg. It gave way to the first black outfield ever. Monty Irvin in left, Willie Mays, and they moved Hank Thompson from third to right.
He was hardly playing them because they were using Bobby Thompson at third. And Hank Thompson had another one who had alcohol problems. He was, in 1951, I think they shipped him to AAA for a while. So, but what was ironic is the Giants had a black player named Artie Wilson, who was very good in the Pacific Coast League. And when they brought Mays up, because they had a quota of 3 or 4 or whatever, they got rid of Artie Wilson.
I'll tell you my Artie Wilson story because, like I say, you could say one thing, it leads to something else with us.
Oh, yeah.
I did a video documentary in 1995 about a team called the Portland Rockies, who were playing in the AAA. They were an A team, a short A team, playing in a AAA ballpark. And in in Portland. They had moved from Bend, Oregon, and they were breaking all kinds of attendance records because of the size of their ballpark. And I went up and did a video documentary on the Portland Rockies. And I spent all day filming with my Zag to my Zig. It was Zig and Zagman Productions. Zag was the photographer, and I'd sit and do the interviews with these folks. And somebody tells me at the end of the day that there's a guy sitting in the stands who's a regular here and has a baseball history. You might have heard of him, Artie Wilson. And I went, whoa, have I heard of him? I knew every player on that 51 Giants by heart. For everybody that you can name, including Clint Hartung. So, yeah, I like to talk to him. So I wander up to him, and I say, Mr. Wilson, I'm doing this, I'm this, that, and the other thing. I'm Ralph Tyko. Like, could you give me a few minutes? And film starts, and I start chatting with him. He's very nice. We talk a little bit. Short little interview, but really terrific. Get back. The battery had died on the record. We got the video, but we got no battery. We had no audio. Is one of those. Technology has not been good to me over the years. It's been very frustrating. For the most part, it has been, because technology enables this network, this show, podcasting. Overall, it's been good, but it has been frustrating at the worst possible times, and that was the worst possible time. I got no audio. The man, long gone now. I would have liked to have had that on film.
Well, when I interviewed Dick Rote in 1985, because he was doing the pit broadcasting, and somebody introduced me to him in Seton Hall. They were coming in to play St. John's a couple of weeks after that. And so we set it up. Meanwhile, he did a card show here, and I brought him some stuff in to sign, $3 a pop. And I had like a tape recorder from the year 1. And I'm not mechanically inclined at all. I mean, my ability is putting a light bulb in without getting electrocuted. And,
that's good. So, that's a good start.
I had no idea. After the interview was over, I was with him for a few hours. I didn't know how it came out, but I bought the tape in, and a friend of mine, Steve Nadell, who I think you had on once.
I have. He's a good Facebook friend. He and Susan were your neighbors. Am I correct?
No. I met Steve because at the local meeting of the Sabre, I'm looking down the addresses. I see 2137 Wallace Avenue, Bronx. I spent my first 8 years in that building.
Oh, so that's great.
We started talking, and we became friends pretty fast. And he was an audio engineer, so he helped me cut the tape. And when I took the, because I was nervous as hell when I did the presentation here, and I'd never spoken in public before, and I had no idea how I was received. I wound up doing it in the last 2 innings of the 1960 World Series, and people came up and congratulated me. So I took it out to Oakland, because that's where the National was that year, and I got up there and on a stage that was higher than the audience, and I had absolutely no trouble at all with it. I broke through the barrier, and but the technology was very, very primitive. Primitive
and intimidating to someone like you and I, who it's not mechanical skills, it's technical skills. I learned that when they tested me going into the Air Force. I had virtually none of either, but it's two
They put me through a battery of tests when I was in high school, whatever. I did the academic stuff. I did very, very well. On the mechanical, I got 4.
Right.
Out of 100.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Another long story about my having to graduate Newtown High School. They put me, given that I literally got a 19 on my report card in Spanish and a 20 the same year, the same semester in mechanical drawing. 65 was passing, and to graduate, you had to have over a 65 average. So in my last year, I had to make up that to get my average up to graduate. I had to take classes like business machines, and one of them was auto mechanics. And I had this great teacher, and I was a smart ass in high school. And all he required of me is to please, he says, I will give you any grade that's necessary for, even though you don't know a piston from a camshaft, I will give you any grade necessary if you will just say nothing. Don't interrupt the class, like I was famous for at Newtown High School. So he ended up giving me something like a 95 without ever expecting me to know anything. He literally was the first guy to pay me to shut up. Many people have done.
I got paid, but I had the same deal in my last year at Hebrew school.
Yeah, it wasn't paid money, but it was paid.
No, but
paid for.
That year I was 12. I had regular school and then bar mitzvah lessons and then Hebrew school. It was like 9 to 6:30. So for 2 months I was able to cut out of Hebrew school. After my bar mitzvah lessons, they caught me. So they threatened not to bar mitzvah me, and my mother got all sorts of crazy because they were members of the synagogue there. And finally, they said, "Well, if you sit in the back of the room and don't say anything for the next 2 months, we'll let you get bar mitzvah." So I said, as long as they don't call on me for anything, I'll do it. So that's happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Our silence has been purchased for one reason or another. Alan, you're terrific. Thank you for a great podcast.
Okay. I hope Noel was okay.
I hope he is too. I can't, from this phone, I can't talk and check in on the emails.
Okay, if you do talk to him or hear from him, give him my best.
I will. I'm grateful. That's all I wanted to tell you. And I'm grateful for listeners. Thank you very much. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The show is when the Jints, Dem Bums, and the Yanks played in New York. So we'll be back next week with Noel. Be well, everybody.
Okay, take care.
Thank you again, Alan. Bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.